London, 1950. A man walks through the fog wearing a tailored coat and gloves, his steps measured, his gaze unreadable. He doesn't look like a hero, yet he carries the calm confidence of one who knows every secret in the room. He was John Bingham, the nobleman spy who shaped the world's most famous secret agent. While millions would one day know the name James Bond, few ever heard of Bingham. He wasn't chasing villains in casinos or firing guns in the tropics. He was writing reports in silence, decoding fear, and serving a country that would later erase him from memory. Ian Fleming once said Bond was built from fragments of real men, but Bingham was the one who bled truth into fiction. And when his stories became legend, his own name disappeared into classified files. He inspired a hero who lived forever, yet chose a life no one would ever see. This is the story of the real spy, who might have been Bond. Before James Bond became the embodiment of danger and charm, there was John Bingham, the 7th Baron Clanmorris of County Mayo, a man born into quiet privilege and trained in the art of silence. Educated at Eton and Cambridge, he belonged to a world that valued restraint more than revelation. When World War II broke out, that same restraint made him invaluable to MI5. Bingham's life was the opposite of cinematic spectacle. No tuxedos, no Aston Martins, no shaken martinis. Instead, there were long nights of surveillance, whispered codes, and an understanding that real espionage was built on patience, not glamour. He became one of Britain's most trusted intelligence officers, a gentleman whose manners disarmed enemies more effectively than any weapon. Among his colleagues was a naval officer named Ian Fleming, who later transformed Bingham's quiet precision and moral ambiguity into the myth of James Bond. The daring escapades on screen were fantasy, but the heart, the conflicted loyalty, the loneliness, the unspoken price of secrecy came from Bingham himself. He helped shape a legend that conquered cinema, but in doing so, he vanished behind it. His files were sealed, his name omitted, and his story, the real story, remained in the dark. But what really happened behind the light? John Bingham was born into nobility in 1908, yet his world was far from indulgent. The post-Victorian Britain he grew up in valued discipline over display, silence over sentiment. His father, the 6th Baron Clanmorris, raised him to understand that power meant composure. From Eton to Trinity College, Cambridge, young Bingham absorbed the lessons of restraint and observation qualities that would one day make him indispensable. When World War II erupted, he didn't rush to the front lines. Instead, he was drawn into the quiet machinery of intelligence. MI5 recruited him not for his title, but for his unflappable demeanor and subtle mind. His colleagues described him as the man who never seemed surprised. Within the smoke-filled offices of wartime London, Bingham mastered the art of invisibility. He could listen without appearing to, persuade without raising his voice, and disappear into the background of any room. Those who met him spoke of his uncanny ability to make others reveal their secrets and keep his own forever. By the time peace returned, John Bingham had become a quiet legend in British intelligence circles. He wasn't celebrated in newspapers or honored with medals. But inside MI5, whispers followed him. The nobleman who could read anyone and whose calm eyes saw everything. He had found purpose in shadows, and it was only the beginning. When peace returned, London rebuilt itself with stories, and one of the men weaving those stories was Ian Fleming. The two had worked in the same circles, shared quiet dinners, and traded insights about human nature and deception. Fleming admired Bingham's elegance, his discipline, his unflinching moral code. But what fascinated him most was Bingham's ability to conceal emotion, the perfect mask for a secret agent. When Casino Royale was published in 1953, Bingham recognized fragments of himself in its pages. The charm without warmth, the loyalty shadowed by solitude. Fleming had transformed real observation into myth, and Bingham, ever discreet, said nothing. But behind his silence, a discomfort grew. He never wanted to be famous, and now a version of him was on every cinema screen in the world. The suave killer in a tuxedo was everything he was not, and yet everything the public believed him to be. He couldn't correct the story, because to do so would expose the very secrets he had sworn to protect. As Bond fever spread, Bingham withdrew further. He refused interviews, avoided society gatherings, and returned to his first defense: silence. To the public, he was invisible. To those who knew, he was the man whose truth had been rewritten. He had given the world its hero and, in exchange, lost the right to his own story. By the late 1960 seconds, the name Bond had eclipsed everything else. The Cold War had turned espionage into spectacle, and real intelligence officers like John Bingham became relics of a quieter age. Within MI5, new methods took over faster, louder, more political. For a man built on loyalty and subtlety, this new world felt alien. Bingham retired from active intelligence work, retreating into the solitude of writing. He began publishing novels understated, moral, psychological about betrayal and conscience, not explosions and gadgets. Works like 5 Roundabouts to Heaven revealed a mind preoccupied with the human cost of deceit. Critics praised his precision, but the public, intoxicated by Fleming's fantasy, paid little attention. He had lived the truth, yet fiction now belonged to someone else. The irony wasn't lost on him. The man who inspired James Bond could barely sell books in the same genre. Over time, Bingham became increasingly isolated. His sense of duty had kept him silent, but silence also erased him. Friends noticed how he avoided any mention of Fleming, Bond, or his days in MI5. The newspapers that once glorified spies now ignored him completely. He once told a close colleague, "Perhaps the best spies are meant to disappear." And that is exactly what he did, slowly, gracefully, almost by design. In the final decades of his life, John Bingham retreated further into anonymity. The world of espionage he had once served was changing, digitized, and politicized. While he remained a figure from a vanished England, one of cigarette smoke, coded telegrams, and gentlemanly discretion. He lived quietly with his family, turning down interviews that might have restored his name. When journalists sought to confirm his connection to Bond, he simply smiled and declined to comment. "Let the stories belong to the storytellers," he once murmured to a friend. By the time he passed away in 1988, the myth of James Bond had become eternal, but the man who helped shape it was all but forgotten. His funeral was small, attended by those who knew how many secrets had died with him. There were no headlines, no tributes on television, no hint that one of the inspirations for 007 had just left the stage. After his death, MI5 sealed his files under the Official Secrets Act, locking away the details of his service for 30 more years. To the public, he was a novelist of minor reputation. To history, he was an absence, a ghost in the machine of British intelligence. It was a fitting end for a man who had lived his life unseen. In death, John Bingham remained loyal to the silence that defined him. Decades after his passing, when portions of MI5's archives were finally declassified, fragments of John Bingham's true story emerged. Within those yellowed files lay reports signed in his calm handwriting analyses that had once shaped counterintelligence operations across Europe. Former colleagues described him as the conscience of MI5, a man who saw espionage not as adventure, but as duty. As historians revisited the origins of James Bond, Bingham's name resurfaced. Literary scholars compared his quiet restraint and moral clarity to the darker impulses Fleming explored in his novels. The contrast was striking. Where Bond seduced and destroyed, Bingham questioned and observed. He was the moral compass behind the legend and the shadow that made the light more believable. In time, his own novels found new readers who recognized their quiet brilliance. They weren't thrill rides. They were portraits of men trapped between loyalty and loneliness, the true texture of espionage. John Bingham never sought to be remembered. But in the end, the world returned to him, piecing together the man behind the myth. The real spy who lived without applause, whose calm gaze still lingers in every tailored suit, every silent pause, every moment Bond lowers his gun. Some legends live in fame, others endure in silence. Fame builds monuments of light, but John Bingham lived as proof that some stories are strongest in shadow. While the world adored a hero of cinema, reckless, seductive, invincible, the real man moved through life with quiet grace, bound by honor and secrecy. His brilliance lay not in spectacle, but in restraint, not in what he revealed, but in what he chose to conceal. James Bond became a global fantasy, a symbol of British power and poise. Yet the soul beneath that image, the discipline, the melancholy, the code of silence belonged to Bingham. Where Bond's adventures began with a gun, Bingham's began with a thought. He never sought the spotlight, and history almost obliged by forgetting him. But the truth lingers like smoke in a dimly lit room. The fiction lived forever because the man behind it never asked to. In the story of fame and shadows, John Bingham reminds us that sometimes disappearing is the truest form of loyalty. What do you think did the real spy deserve to be remembered as much as the legend he inspired? John Bingham never asked for fame, yet his silence shaped one of the greatest myths of modern cinema. If you believe stories like his deserve to be told, the quiet ones, the forgotten ones, share your thoughts below. Because behind every icon, there's someone who lived the truth in secret.